The text message arrived at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing investment portfolios in my downtown office. Family reunion Saturday at the lake house. Don't embarrass us this time, Richard. I screenshot the message and added it to my ever-growing documentation folder. Uncle Richard had been sending variations of this message for 12 years, ever since I'd started attending family gatherings as an adult. Each one a reminder that I was adopted, that I didn't quite belong, that my presence was tolerated rather than welcomed. What Uncle Richard didn't know was that his lake house, his construction empire, his lifestyle, and his ability to host family reunions were all funded by his silent partner, the same charity case he loved to publicly humiliate. The relationship had started innocently enough. Fresh out of business school 15 years ago, I'd been working at a consulting firm when Richard's construction company landed on my desk as a client facing bankruptcy. His books were a disaster, his cash flow negative, his expansion plans delusional. Any rational analyst would have recommended liquidation. Instead, I saw potential. Richard had vision and connections but no financial discipline. His projects were solid but his management was catastrophic. I'd structured an anonymous investment through shell companies, providing the capital injection that saved his business while maintaining complete secrecy about my identity. Over the years, that initial investment had grown into something much larger. Richard's construction empire now spans 6 states, employed over 3,000 people and generated annual revenues exceeding $400 million. My stake had grown to $200 million, making me not just his largest investor, but his controlling partner in everything except name. Richard believed his success was entirely self-made. His favorite story, told at every family gathering, involved pulling himself up from near bankruptcy through grit, determination, and refusing to accept handouts. The irony was lost on him but never on me. Saturday morning brought the familiar ritual of preparing for family judgment. I dressed carefully, nice enough to show respect, modest enough to avoid accusations of showing off. My Honda Accord would blend in with the other middle-class vehicles, while Richard's collection of luxury cars dominated the circular driveway. The lake house was spectacular as always. Sprawling across 3 acres of prime waterfront, it featured custom architecture that Richard loved to describe in detail to anyone who would listen. The construction had been funded through a capital distribution from our partnership that Richard believed was a business loan he'd paid back early through smart investing. Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence, came Richard's booming voice as I approached the deck. He was holding court with my cousins Mike and David, both of whom worked for his construction company in management positions they'd inherited rather than earned. Hello, Uncle Richard. Thank you for having me. Always room for family at the Richards family lake house, he declared, gesturing expansively. Even the adopted ones. The assembled cousins chuckled appropriately. This was Richard's standard opening move, establishing the hierarchy immediately, reminding everyone of their place in his version of the family structure. How's the accounting job treating you, Sophie? Mike asked with practiced concern. Still doing bookkeeping for small businesses? It pays the bills, I replied. This was technically accurate. My accounting firm was indeed small, consisting of just me and 2 employees, and it did handle books for various small businesses. What they didn't know was that those small businesses included several of my own investment vehicles and consulting operations. Must be nice to have simple work, David added. No real pressure, no big decisions to make. Richard nodded approvingly. That's the difference between real entrepreneurs and people who play it safe. Some of us build empires. Others balance checkbooks. The morning continued with familiar patterns. Richard dominated conversations with stories of his latest projects, his expanded workforce, his industry recognition. My cousins peppered their updates with references to their roles in the family business, and their pride in working for someone as successful as their father. The best part, Richard announced during lunch, is knowing that everything we've built will stay in the family. Real family. The people who understand what it means to carry on the Richards legacy. What about Sophie? Asked my cousin Lisa, Richard's daughter who'd recently graduated college with an art degree funded by partnership distributions Richard thought were profits from smart investments. Richard's expression became serious, the way it always did when the topic of inheritance arose. Sophie's not really family in that sense. She was a charity case we took in when her parents died. We gave her opportunities, sure, but the business legacy belongs to blood relatives. That makes sense, Mike agreed. Family businesses should stay with actual family members. It's nothing personal against Sophie, David added. But she wouldn't understand the construction industry anyway. It's not really her world. I continued eating potato salad while listening to detailed explanations of why I wasn't qualified to inherit assets I'd been secretly funding for over a decade. The conversation was particularly ironic given that I'd just approved a $50 million expansion budget for their Tennessee operations the previous week. The thing is, Richard continued, warming to his theme, building something like this requires vision that you can't teach. Either you have it or you don't. Sophie's a nice girl, does her little accounting work, but she doesn't have the entrepreneur gene. Some people are meant to work for others, Lisa observed. Nothing wrong with that. Exactly. Sophie found her level, small business bookkeeping. She's probably happier not having to deal with the pressure of real business decisions. After lunch, Richard gathered the entire family for what he called his State of the Empire presentation. This annual tradition involved detailed PowerPoint slides showing revenue growth, expansion plans, and market projections. What it actually showed was a comprehensive overview of how my investment strategies had built and sustained his business empire. 22% revenue growth this year, he announced proudly. Expansion into 3 new markets. Industry recognition as Construction Company of the Year from Regional Business Magazine. The assembled family applauded enthusiastically. Richard's success reflected well on all of them, validating their association with a real entrepreneur who'd built something from nothing. The key to sustainable growth, Richard explained, clicking through slides I'd helped prepare through my consulting work, is understanding market timing, maintaining strong cash flow, and never accepting outside investment that dilutes your control. This last point was particularly amusing, given that outside investment controlled 60% of his company through various legal structures he didn't fully understand. Dad's always been amazing at seeing opportunities others miss, Mike added. Remember when everyone said expanding into commercial development was too risky? That's the difference between leaders and followers, Richard replied. When you know you're right, you commit fully. No hedging, no safety nets, no asking for handouts. The presentation continued with projections for the next 5 years, including plans for expansion into 2 additional states and acquisition of 3 smaller construction companies. These plans were based on feasibility studies my consulting firm had prepared and financial modeling that assumed continued partnership investment. Of course, none of this would be possible without the strong foundation we built in the early years, Richard said. Those were tough times. Nearly went bankrupt in 2008. But instead of giving up or accepting help, I found a way to turn things around through pure determination. How did you manage that turnaround? Asked Lisa's boyfriend, who was attending his first family reunion. Richard's expression became nostalgic. I found some investors who believed in my vision. Nothing personal, just business relationships with people who recognized potential when they saw it. But the important thing is I maintained control. Never gave up equity, never compromised my decision-making authority. That's smart, the boyfriend replied. A lot of entrepreneurs make the mistake of giving up too much control to investors. Exactly. The investors I worked with understood that their role was purely financial. They provided capital, I provided the vision and execution. Perfect partnership. I excused myself to get more iced tea while Richard continued explaining his business philosophy to an audience that hung on every word. Walking through the lake house, I passed family photos showing Richard's construction projects, industry award ceremonies, and ribbon-cutting events at buildings I'd helped finance. The kitchen was filled with expensive appliances and custom cabinetry, all funded through partnership distributions. The wine collection in the adjacent room featured bottles worth more than most people's monthly salaries. The boat dock visible through the window displayed Richard's latest yacht, purchased with what he believed were bonus payments from satisfied clients. Sophie, there you are, came Richard's voice behind me. We were just discussing the future of the company. I turned to find him with Mike and David, all 3 looking serious in a way that suggested important family business was being discussed. The thing is, Richard continued, we've reached a point where succession planning becomes critical. Mike and David have proven themselves in the company, understand the industry, earned their positions through hard work. It's exciting to think about carrying on what Dad built, Mike said. The transition will happen gradually, Richard explained. But the important thing is keeping ownership and control within the actual family. People who understand what this business really means to the Richards name. David nodded. It would be weird to have outsiders involved in something so personal. Right, Richard agreed. This isn't just a business, it's a legacy. Sophie, you understand why this needs to stay with blood relatives, don't you? I understand your perspective, I replied. I knew you would. You're practical about these things. You've got your accounting work, your own life. You don't need the complications that come with major business ownership. Complications can be challenging, I agreed. Exactly. Better for everyone if the people who built something get to decide what happens to it. The afternoon continued with various family activities, swimming, volleyball, conversations about careers and relationships. I participated appropriately while listening to ongoing discussions about the business, expansion plans, and family legacy. During dinner, Richard stood to make what he called an important announcement. I want to thank everyone for being here today. Family means everything to me, and seeing all of you together at the lake house reminds me why we work so hard to build something lasting. The table grew quiet as Richard prepared for what was clearly going to be a significant pronouncement. After a lot of thought and discussion with my advisors, I've decided to begin formal succession planning for the construction company. Mike and David will be taking increased ownership stakes over the next 5 years, with full control transferring to them by the time I retire. Applause erupted around the table. Mike and David looked genuinely emotional. Lisa beamed with pride, and various relatives offered congratulations. This is how business should work, Richard continued. The people who understand the industry, who've earned their positions, who carry the family name, they're the ones who should control what we've built. What about the investors Dad mentioned earlier? Asked Lisa's boyfriend. Richard waved dismissively. They're just financial partners. They provide capital, we provide everything else. When the time comes, we'll buy them out and keep everything in family hands where it belongs. How much would that buyout cost? Mike asked. Hard to say exactly. Maybe 50-60 million. But we're generating enough cash flow now that financing shouldn't be a problem. I continued eating dessert while listening to detailed plans for buying out investors who would never sell because the investors were me, and I was sitting at the table listening to plans for my own elimination from the business I'd built. The important thing, Richard concluded, is that family money stays in real family. Not charity cases we took in, not outside investors looking for quick profits, not anyone who doesn't understand what the Richards name really means. The table erupted in agreement. Various relatives praised Richard's wisdom, his loyalty to family values, his commitment to keeping the business where it belongs. To family, Richard declared, raising his wine glass. And to keeping what we've built in the hands of people who deserve it. Everyone toasted except me. I was mentally calculating exactly how much Richard's empire was worth without my investment, and wondering how long it would take him to understand that his charity case niece had been his silent partner for 15 years. Sophie, you're being awfully quiet, Richard observed. What do you think about all this succession planning? I think you should do whatever you believe is right for your family, I replied. I knew you'd understand. You've always been practical about knowing your place. The evening concluded with more family bonding, promises to gather again at Christmas, and detailed discussions about the construction company's bright future under Mike and David's leadership. I helped clean up while listening to conversations about legacy, family values, and the importance of keeping business ownership in the right hands. Driving home, I reflected on 15 years of silent partnership with a man who publicly dismissed me as a charity case while privately depending on my capital to fund his lifestyle. Richard genuinely believed his success was self-made, his investors were passive financial partners, and his adopted niece was an accounting clerk who'd never understand real business. Sunday morning, I called my attorney from my home office. Margaret, I need to discuss the Richards construction partnership. The $200 million position? What are you thinking? Complete dissolution. I want out of every investment vehicle, every joint venture, every financial relationship. There was a long pause. Sophie, that's essentially their entire capital base. Without your investment, they're looking at immediate liquidity crisis, probably bankruptcy within 6 months. I understand the implications. This isn't just about Richard's company. 3,000 employees, dozens of subcontractors, multiple ongoing projects. The collateral damage will be extensive. I thought about Mike and David's graduation parties I'd helped fund, Lisa's art school tuition that came from partnership distributions, Richard's lake house that existed because of my capital injections. How long will the dissolution process take? Given the complexity of the legal structures, probably 4 to 6 weeks. But Sophie, once this process starts, there's no undoing it. Are you certain this is what you want? I'm certain. I'll need documentation of cause for dissolution. Contract breach, material changes in partnership structure, something that justifies immediate withdrawal. Richard announced yesterday that he's planning to buy out all investors to keep the business in family hands. I'd say that constitutes a material change in our partnership agreement. That should be sufficient legal grounds. I'll begin drafting the dissolution documents. Monday morning brought a busy day of meetings with attorneys, accountants, and financial advisors. The legal mechanics of unwinding a $200 million partnership were complex, involving multiple shell companies, joint ventures, and investment vehicles that had been carefully structured to maintain my anonymity. Margaret's team worked with surgical precision to identify every aspect of my financial relationship with Richard's empire. Real estate holdings, equipment financing, working capital loans, expansion funding. The web of financial interdependence was more extensive than even I had realized. The cascade effects will be immediate, Margaret explained during our afternoon meeting. Equipment lease payments will stop, construction loans will be called, working capital will disappear. Richard's going to wake up Thursday morning facing complete financial collapse. What about employee protections? We can structure the dissolution to prioritize payroll and benefits, but ultimately Richard will need to find replacement funding or begin liquidation proceedings. And the likelihood of him finding replacement funding? For $200 million? Given his debt ratios and cash flow requirements? Essentially zero. Tuesday brought news that Richard had already begun reaching out to banks and investment firms about restructuring our investor relationships to optimize family control. His timing was impeccable. He was actively seeking to eliminate me from the partnership just as I was eliminating myself. Wednesday afternoon, Margaret called with an update. All dissolution documents have been filed. Richard's attorneys will receive notification tomorrow morning. Asset liquidation begins immediately. How long before he understands the scope of the situation? Based on the cash flow models, he'll start seeing problems by Friday. Bank calls, supplier payment issues, payroll concerns. The full scope will probably take a week to sink in. Thursday morning, I was reviewing quarterly reports when my phone began buzzing with family group chat notifications. Richard, temporary cash flow issue with the company. Working with our financial team to resolve quickly. Mike, Dad, is this serious? The bank called about our construction loan. David, equipment company wants immediate payment on our lease agreements. Lisa, what's happening? Should I be worried? Richard, just business complications. Nothing that can't be handled. The messages continued throughout the day, escalating from temporary issues to significant challenges to emergency family meeting called for Saturday. Friday brought more urgent communications. Richard's confident morning message about minor setbacks was followed by increasingly frantic updates about bank meetings, attorney consultations, and unexpected investor complications. By Saturday morning, the family group chat had evolved into a full crisis communication channel. Richard, family meeting moved to my office. Lake house events canceled until further notice. Mike, Dad, the employees are asking questions about their jobs. David, should we start looking for emergency funding? Lisa, can someone please explain what's actually happening? I arrived at Richard's corporate headquarters to find the parking lot nearly empty and a small group of family members huddled in the conference room. Richard looked like he'd aged 5 years in 1 week. Sophie, thank God you're here, he said, looking genuinely relieved to see me. We need all the family support we can get right now. The conference room felt different than usual. Instead of Richard's confident presentations about expansion and success, the atmosphere was tense with barely controlled panic. I'll be direct, Richard began. Our primary investor partnership has been terminated. Effective immediately. Without cause, without warning, without negotiation opportunity. How much money are we talking about? Mike asked. Approximately $200 million in various forms. Equipment financing, working capital, expansion funding, real estate holdings. The room fell silent as people processed the magnitude of the crisis. Can we replace that funding? David asked. I've spent the week meeting with every major bank and investment firm in 3 states. The answer is no. Our debt-to-equity ratios are too high, our expansion has been too aggressive, our capital requirements are too extensive. What does that mean for the company? Lisa asked quietly. It means we're looking at bankruptcy. Complete liquidation. 3,000 jobs lost, dozens of projects cancelled, 15 years of building completely destroyed. The silence stretched longer this time. Richard's empire, his legacy, his family's future, all of it crumbling because his anonymous silent partner had chosen to withdraw support. The thing I don't understand, Richard continued, is why now? Our investor partnership has been stable for 15 years. Profitable, professional, no conflicts or complications. Then suddenly, complete termination with no explanation. Maybe they found better investment opportunities? Mike suggested. Maybe they needed liquidity for other projects? David added. Richard shook his head. I've been racking my brain trying to understand what changed. The only significant development was my announcement last weekend about succession planning and buying out our investors to keep the business in family hands. You think they didn't like that idea? Lisa asked. I can't imagine why. It was a business decision, nothing personal. We would have paid fair market value, negotiated reasonable terms, maintained all existing relationships. I listened to Richard's struggle to understand why his plan to eliminate his investors had resulted in his investors eliminating him. The irony was perfect, but explaining it would serve no useful purpose. The question now, Richard continued, is what we do next. Bankruptcy proceedings will probably take 6 months. After that, I'll be starting over at age 58 with no assets, no company, no income. What about the lake house? Mike asked. Financed through company assets. It'll be part of the liquidation. The boats, the cars, the investments? All tied to company cash flow. Everything goes. The family spent the next hour discussing practical matters, job searches for Mike and David, living arrangements once the lake house was sold, college funding for Lisa now that partnership distributions had disappeared. I keep thinking there must be something we can do, Richard said. Some way to contact our investors directly, negotiate a compromise, explain that this affects thousands of people who depend on us. Do we know who they are? David asked. That's the frustrating part. 15 years of partnership and I never met them face to face. Everything went through lawyers and shell companies. Professional but completely anonymous. Why would they structure it that way? Lisa wondered. Privacy, I assume. Some investors prefer to stay behind the scenes, especially with family businesses. Less complicated that way. I could have explained the real reason for anonymity, that watching Richard take credit for my business strategies while dismissing me as a charity case had provided 15 years of educational entertainment. But that conversation would come later, if at all. The hardest part, Richard continued, is knowing that someone out there made a decision that destroyed everything we built, and we'll never even know who they are or why they did it. Maybe it wasn't personal, Mike offered. Maybe it was just business. Maybe. But the timing feels deliberate. Right after I announced plans to buy them out and keep the business in family hands. Like they were sending a message. What kind of message? Lisa asked. Richard was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. Maybe that family loyalty only goes one direction. Maybe that some people can't be bought out because they're not really investors, they're something else entirely. The meeting concluded with plans for Monday's bankruptcy filing, employee notifications and media management. Richard's construction empire would officially end within 30 days, taking with it the lake house, the lifestyle and the family legacy he'd spent 15 years building on borrowed capital. Driving home, I reflected on the strange justice of watching Richard's plan to eliminate his charity case investor result in his charity case investor eliminating him. The symmetry was perfect, even if he'd never understand it. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Liquidation proceeds from Richard's construction partnership will total approximately $180 million after legal fees. How would you like those funds distributed? I pulled over to reply. Establish scholarship fund for business students from foster care backgrounds. Use the Richards Construction name if possible. Understood. Anything else? Send anonymous notification to Richard when the scholarship fund is announced. He might appreciate knowing his legacy will help people who understand what it means to be charity cases. 3 months later, the regional business magazine featured a story about the Richards Construction Scholarship Fund, established through an anonymous donation to support foster children pursuing business degrees. Richard never learned that his former charity case niece had transformed his collapsed empire into opportunities for young people who, like her, had been told they didn't belong in real families, but might surprise everyone with what they could build when given the chance. Sometimes the most powerful legacy isn't the one you plan. It's the one that emerges when the people you underestimated decide to show you what real family values actually look like.